Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us for the do's and don'ts of AI-generated marketing content. My name is Jim Brophy. I'm the Group Director of Digital here at Northwoods, and I will be your moderator this morning. I have to admit, I've had a very busy couple of weeks. And by busy, I mean relaxing. I had an exhausting spring break, just kind of laying around the house. I did do some traveling, had family and friends over to watch March Madness basketball games. I mean, when you think about it, when was I supposed to have time to prepare for our webinar today? Among other things to do to get ready, I needed to find the time to write this webinar introduction. So I thought to myself, I know, I'll have ChatGPT write it for me. But then I thought better of it. Oh, sure, I could have done that, and you all would have been none the wiser. But would a slick, polished, and varnished introduction been authentic? Tailored to an audience who, like us, are trying to evolve in a world where dis and misinformation is everywhere, would that really be on brand for Northwoods? Or for me? Well, not really, and that matters. So today, we're going to discuss how, when, and why AI is useful and how it works. We will discuss AI's impact on SEO, provide some prompt writing tips on how to create effective content, and of course, we will answer any questions that you might have. Speaking of those questions, you can submit them to our presenter using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time during the presentation, and we will answer as many as we can during the Q&A session. Also, we'll be sending out a link to a recording of today's program in the next day or two, so you can rewatch the webinar at your convenience and share it with your colleagues. For those of you who are not familiar with Northwoods, or if this is your first time attending one of our webinars, I want to take just a minute to introduce ourselves. We're a digital strategy, digital marketing and advertising, website design, and software development agency based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We've been helping companies grow their online presence for more than 25 years and have worked with more than 1,000 clients of all sizes across a wide variety of both B2B and B2C industries. At Northwoods, we keep up on trends and best practices constantly and develop some of our own. And in doing so, we create strategies based on data and thought leadership that you can count on. You can check out our client stories and blog at nwsdigital.com for more great content. One of our core values here at Northwoods is lifelong learning, and we're proud to share our knowledge with others by offering dozens of free education programs every year, including webinars like today's. You can find a complete schedule of our upcoming classes at learn@northwoods.com. But enough about us. Let's go ahead and dive into our presentation. Our trail guide this morning will be Alex Boston. Alex blends his academic background in creative writing with rigorous data analysis to conceptualize, create, and assess content for Northwoods clients. As a digital strategist, he applies more than 10 years of digital marketing experience to his work in content strategy and governance, SEO, and user testing. Alex prioritizes flexibility, simplicity, and the needs of his audience, and is Google Ads and Scrum Master certified, so you're in very good hands this morning. So Alex, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jim. This is a topic that I'm really excited to talk about, so thank you very much for joining us today for this session on AI. It's a oft-discussed topic, and with good reason, because it has a lot of implications that we don't even fully understand yet. This sort of advancements in AI in recent years made a big splash on countless industries. Digital marketing is certainly not the least of which that's been affected. So what we're going to do is try and dispel some of that fear and anxiety that comes when there's something that comes up that we don't understand, especially new technology, and just unpack a little bit about how it works so that we can understand what the tools actually are. Then we're going to talk through how it affects search engine optimization specifically, but broadly also just the whole field of content generation when it comes to digital marketing, to everything from blogs to social posts, anything that you're generating for the web. AI can certainly have a mark on. So we're going to talk through both how it works and then kind of how you can use it effectively as an empowering tool to make it a bit less scary. But before we dive into the rudiments of how AI tools work to provide a sort of basic shared understanding, we did have one quick question just to try and gauge where everybody is sitting when it comes to your engagement with AI tools. Have you AI tools in general changed how you and your team produce digital content currently? Have you engaged with these tools at all? And it's just a simple yes or no poll that we're going to leave up for a second or two here. Right. Looks like slightly more of you have engaged than haven't, which is not surprising. It's, something that's affecting all of our work. Naturally, I think curiosity drives us to explore it at some point. For those of you who are brand new to AI tools, this will be a great primer as to how they work and also kind of how to more effectively engage with it. So when it comes to AI, there's a couple terms that get thrown around interchangeably that are parts of a thing, but aren't really the same thing. And that's AI versus machine learning versus deep learning. You'll hear all these terms sort of used to describe particularly ChatGPT, which is kind of the one that has taken the world by storm recently. So when we talk about AI, we're talking about this broad category of tools that stimulates human information processing. So that can be anything from just simple recall, like it's got a database and it can help you kind of sort through it and surface information that you're looking through. Again, sort of similar to how we appreciate or how we approach memory, but it's stimulated by a machine as opposed to gray matter. So that kind of has a broad swath of applications as a term. It's sort of the umbrella that all of these terms fall under. And this is something that's been around for a while. We've been simulating human info processing for decades now in more and less advanced ways. The interesting thing now is just how immediately accessible these tools are. In fact, you'll see machine learning almost everywhere you go nowadays. So machine learning is just anything that uses an advanced algorithm to predict what's going to happen or what someone might want as an input based on their historical user patterns or any data, really. So it tries to predict the future based on what it sees from the past. And so it learns in that way from the past and from the data set that it's given. Netflix cues and recommendations are a part of this. Your recommended sections on YouTube are also a part of this sort of machine learning ecosystem that we've built in the internet. So it's based on your previous user patterns. It's going to recommend something from the future. When you take in several layers of that machine learning and basically create a sort of working network of machine learning algorithms, you can create something called deep learning, which is when it's not just based on the past and putting in simple predictive outputs based on what it's learned from previous inputs. It's going to actually, in a way, mirror a human brain. It's going to evolve. All of these machine learning networks are going to work together to try and access massive data sets and synthesize all of these different components together into a more advanced, more sophisticated output that can look more like what a human can produce. ChatGPT is an example of a deep learning network. It uses a bunch of different algorithms and has access to essentially the whole internet as its data set, as well as a couple inputs that it started with directly to output something that looks like actual, first of all, writing that would, pass for something that was produced by a human. But that's sort of where AI sits within this currently, as this deep learning stage of AI. Now, it's not sophisticated enough to take over for a human. It still needs the input. It still needs something to get things rolling. And that's where the prompting process comes in. If you've never worked with ChatGPT, it's basically a chat interface where you put in a short prompt explaining what you'd like it to try and help you do. And it goes ahead and tries to do that based on what it knows of, the prompt that you're explaining. So what actually happens when you type in a prompt, let's say as an example, I wanted to prompt an AI to help me write a blog article that explains the origins of heavy metal music. It's a fairly simple task and it's one sentence. I'm not giving it a whole lot of detail to work with, but what it's going to do is break it down very similarly to how we might break it down if we were, say, students back in school and we were given this assignment by a teacher. The first thing we might look for is, what does it actually want me to do, this prompt? So it's going to break down the task at hand, and it's going to recognize a couple words based on its learning algorithm. It's going to write and explain are going to stick out immediately as terms that it understands as, okay, this is an assignment. They're prompting me with instructions as to what they want me to do. And it's going to go then look up everything that it knows about writing and explaining and try and format an article based on that as a starting point. I can give it more advanced directions by providing it a format. Now it's going to go and scan a bunch of blog articles and see typically what does that format look like? What are some features of that format? And then it's going to start structuring accordingly what it's producing according to that format. Then it's going to take the last portion, which is what's the actual question that I'm trying to answer with the article I'm trying to generate? And that's where the query element comes in, the origins of heavy metal music, something that you might even type into a search engine. It's going to do the same, essentially, and scan the internet, scan its database of content, and pull as much information as it can about the origins of heavy metal music. It's going to mesh all of that together with the task that you've asked it to do and try and mold all of this into the form that you've asked it to fit. Now, all of this happens, all of this deep learning network scanning, and these are massive sets of data because it has access to essentially the whole internet, happens in a matter of seconds. And so the really incredible thing about ChatGPT isn't necessarily the quality of the work it produces, but the speed at which it produces what you could call a workable first draft. And that's exactly what you get. As a test run, I typed this prompt into ChatGPT, and I got a perfectly workable first draft of a blog article that more or less explains the fundamentals of heavy metal music and where it came from. It's reasonably accurate, and you can check through it yourself, but ultimately this was the beginnings of an article. It's got a little bit more length to it too. It actually wrote something somewhat substantial and something that with a little bit of adjustment, I could very easily publish as a blog article if this was relevant to my business or whatever I was using this for. But this is just one dimension of AI's usefulness. And particularly in the realm of content generation, there's a lot of ways in which AI can and is being used. As you can see in this diagram, this is just a small snippet of some of the tools that have been developed based entirely on ChatGPT's API for the most part. There's a couple here that are, kind of other tertiary and AI tools, but most of this comes from ChatGPT's open API. What we're focused on today is mostly that text quarter of this circle, but obviously you can see here there's some additional features and functions that AI serves already when it comes to generating content that are becoming more and more advanced. Video and photography are a separate component that, they're still very much in their rudimentary phases, but even in the past year, they've taken dramatic strides forward, and I think they have an exciting future for at least generating something. I don't think they'll ever keep up with what a human can generate with these, but they'll still be able to give you a first draft, or if you have a stock image that you're trying to replace, we're getting very close to that. The applications in terms of code and speech and actual research modeling is also really advanced and really incredible. Again, partially because just of the speed at which this can synthesize things together. Again, it doesn't replace a human being. It's just that we have to know how to interact with it and how to use it as an empowering tool to do our work faster, to make things more streamlined, and maybe even to get to a more advanced point with our own knowledge and the work that we can do, and just to look for processes that we can speed up or make more thorough as a result. So it's a pretty powerful tool. And it's already being used by content marketers quite a bit for a lot of different diverse uses. So anybody who's creating content online could be engaging with, for example, peer research. Since ChatGPT is very much hooked up to the internet and can draw from things similar to how a search engine might scan through a site, it can also be used as sort of an advanced search engine that you can actually give intention to. And so you can ask it, what are the key product talking points on a site, and include a URL to a site. And it will give you a quick summary of what some of your competitors are talking about, for example. So that can be a good way to speed up some competitor research and at least get some first ideas together to just understand what your peers are talking about. Product descriptions are a really common use of AI. They're something that you've got to produce a lot of them, and they don't necessarily need to be the most shiny, compelling writing. They just need to describe a product, and so it's okay if maybe you don't spend hours slaving over a draft for a product description, but it just kind of quickly gives people a hint of what the product actually is. People are really using ChatGPT for this very frequently. So you can just type in describe a product in a paragraph and link to a product page. and have it scan the product and try and synthesize that into a paragraph. That's, I found, the most effective way to do this. But you can also just kind of give it some basic descriptions of the product in your prompt, and it will format that into a paragraph. It's very good at revising and reshaping text based on, what you want it to actually be turned into. So if you have existing text, that could be another great way to do this. Excuse me. Social posts are also really common fodder for AI. Some people will just approach with a prompt as general as this, just write a Mother's Day tweet for a greeting card company. And actually, it will know what a tweet is and what the, sort of formatting constraints are for that and how many characters it should use. And also it will get a sense for kind of how tweets sound. And then it will start constructing based on that. So it draws from a whole library of internet knowledge to try and format based on what it's seen. Now, photo and video production is something that people are using, but again, this tool is still very much rudimentary. It can't replace all video production or photo content. It's just going to replace the stuff that may not be your mainline or most important photo real estate on your site. Could probably be helped with a AI-generated photo. Or if you want to work around a stock photo, maybe there's something that you just can't find that you're looking for. Sometimes it can generate those with decent efficacy, but I would think that this is going to jump forward in its advancement as we go forward, because I think this is one that people are really curious about and want to engage with. This is one that was just a 60 Minutes piece, particularly about AI chatbots. This is one that a lot of people are buzzing about because they are a bit precarious, but they are being used currently. Just a simple chat window function that pops up and prompts users to engage with a support text kind of function. This can be useful and it can be something that users engage with. The problem is, do you trust the AI chatbot with your support parameters? There have been plenty of use cases already where AI have given discounts or applied something to a user's account that they weren't supposed to and cost companies quite a bit of money as a result. So again, it's something that's very much in its rudimentary phase, but if it's a simple function that the chatbot is fulfilling, it can work. You just have to be careful about programming in those additional parameters to make sure it doesn't give away something for free. The other really exciting one is data analysis. There's actually an advanced paid plan of ChatGPT that allows you to just filter in data sets to it. So you can take a large portion of either customer data or product inventories or user data from your website, sync them all together, just pour all of those spreadsheets into ChatGPT and actually ask it questions about the data. You can also have it synthesize even charts and graphics and stuff based on those charts, and it will do its best to work with the data that you provide. This is a really cool tool and can really speed up some tools for those who may not be well-versed in Excel and don't want to do sort of VLOOKUP advanced stuff. It can make this a lot easier to interact with. And it can also just make it faster. Even if you are skilled in Excel, it can speed up the process of at least giving you a basic idea of where your data sits. And the main use case that is probably the most common that we've seen, also the one as a result that we're going to focus on today as the use case that we're going to talk through, is drafting keyword-focused blog articles. So articles that are focused on capturing a particular keyword, something that sits on your site that's SEO optimized. There's also other copy that it can generate for your site as well. It can do static content, but generally it's most effective at doing this sort of timely, maybe less important blog pieces that don't need to be super refined or reflect a branded message. They just need to sort of offer some content that is going to be useful to people. AI provides a great starting point for that. And this is where we get into how it's an empowering tool. It's not about, none of these functions that we look at here replace a person's function. It's all making those functions more sophisticated. It's all about helping people do more within their role and kind of fill in a function and do it with greater speed, as well as do it potentially in a more sophisticated way that allows more interesting information to come forward that we wouldn't have noticed otherwise, just because of the speed at which they can process these things. It reminds me a lot of the Steve Jobs quote about how a computer is a bicycle for the mind. How without a bicycle, humans are actually pretty calorie inefficient. We burn energy really, really fast when we move around because of our big old brains. But if you put us on a bicycle, we become one of the most energy efficient creatures on the planet. And so there's this great idea, I think, that AI represents, at least at its current iteration, where it can be just an empowering tool. If we learn how to use it, it doesn't have to be frightening. It doesn't have to replace a role or make us obsolete, as might be feared. It's just something that we can work with to better do our jobs and to learn more about the world from what AI can help us surface. And with that in mind, given all these functions that we've gone over here, we have another quick poll question. Which potential use of AI do you think could have the biggest impact on your work? And I have a couple options there, just kind of categories based on what we've gone over so far. All right, thank you very much. It does look like copywriting is the dominant force here, with some additional people interested in market research, chat, and data analysis, which is great. And yes, I do think copywriting is the place where we stand to streamline the most. And so we're going to talk about, fittingly, how to do that using AI tools. The first question we always get is the most common question is right off the bat, can AI write all of my content for me? Can I just leave it, provide some basic prompts, and then just take that content and just throw it right on my website? And the answer is no. It's a very simple thing, just no, it can't do that. What it needs is a human touch. It needs some sort of revision on top of its use to make it really, really powerful. What it's great for on its own is brainstorming. So if you want to toss ideas back and forth, again, if you've never interacted with ChatGPT, it's a conversational AI. So it's a chat system where you can refine your request, you can ask it questions, you can ask it to adjust what it's creating based on how it drafts certain outputs. And so it's great to bounce ideas off of and to do some more research with. That's kind of the broad function that it can start as. It's just general, it's a search engine too, as well. It has this big old brain that is the internet that it has access to, and you can synthesize questions off of it. It's a really good way just to do search in general. There are some reservations to that we'll get into later, but just as a starting point, it's a good possible way to just surface some ideas. It's also a great place just to start with anything that you're interested in writing. You can produce outlines. It can produce an outline for an article. If you say, can you draft an article or an outline for a piece of content on a given topic, it will provide you some sections or some ideas for what you might want to cover. And in terms of first drafts, AI is exceptional. If you just need to get something on paper so that you have something to look at and refine, that's really a great thing that AI can do, is just to get something out there. It's going to need revising and it's going to need some work to make it something more readable, but it's at least a starting point. And that's where AI needs human help. It doesn't really understand what humans enjoy reading. So sometimes its writing can be a little stiff, very formal, and sometimes not very compelling. And if you try and ask it to inject a little bit more personality into it, it often comes up with something really strange and very stiff and inhuman. So generally, we like to just leave the personality to the humans and make sure that we're softening things and making it something that flows in a way humans will actually enjoy reading, and that it's organized in a way that flows in a way that makes sense for people. SEO is a limited thing that AI can help with. Obviously, we're drafting content, and content is great for search engine purposes. But in terms of actually optimizing that for keywords, ChatGPT does not have access to search data, so it can't tell you what keywords you should focus on. And it's basing its best practices in SEO that it's using off of other articles it finds online. It doesn't really know how to apply those. So if you ask it to optimize for a keyword for search engines, it won't really do it the way that it should be done, basically, to try and have the greatest chance of indexing effectively in Google. So you still need to have a human who knows those best practices to try and edit the content and make sure it reflects where keywords should be placed within an article. It also doesn't know how to structure content. Like it doesn't know how to, lay things out. So it can't help you with design per se. I think this is probably going to change at some point. Maybe not ChatGPT, but there will probably be some sort of tool that can help you, kind of produce a basic page layout. How good it will be is another thing. It will always need a human touch to sort of move things around. But again, as a starting point, these things can work. In terms of supporting strategic objectives, it won't understand how this content fits into your site. It won't add links. It won't make anything interactive. It will just kind of basically provide you with a solid starting point in terms of copy that you can then mold into what you need it to be. One of the other popular questions that we get is, does it hurt SEO to use AI-generated content to try and rank? And the fact is, it's a fair question because Google's response to AI has been a little confusing at times. It was hard to suss out exactly how they felt about it at first. In fact, when ChatGPT launched in November of 2022, it was a solid 4 months. Google kind of gave trickles of indications as to how they felt about it. But it wasn't until February that we actually got updated search guidelines where they felt confident enough to say that Google, quote, rewards high quality content however it's produced. And this has been their line ever since. The line has been consistently it's high quality content. We don't care if it comes from AI. We just don't want it to be spammy and low quality content. And in fact, we'll get into their most recent update, which kind of reflects this. But and yet at the same time, we were hearing some of these sentiments on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, about how seniors, like various search analysts and people within the search engine team didn't like AI. And it kind of set the signal both to the public and maybe to marketers at large that maybe something was coming, that Google wasn't going to embrace AI fully. This is a tweet, as an example, from March 2023, where somebody asked if they could use ChatGPT for their content for search. It's giving 80% unique content. And one of their senior search analysts tweeted back, it's like food with only 20% toxic chemicals. Sounds tasty. That doesn't sound like the most positive approach to AI. So people were a little nervous at first as to whether or not AI content was going to get penalized heavily in search. And in some ways, it has been, but only when it's low quality. The most recent update to the Google core algorithm was completed in March 2024, and it targeted spammy, low quality content. Basically, in the year between setting that guideline and today, there was a lot of content that came out that was incredibly spammy. There was a quantity over quality approach to content generation. People threw everything to ChatGPT. And there was just thousands of articles that hit the web that were incredibly poorly formatted and poorly written. And at first, they were actually ranking okay and doing fine, which was frustrating for people who were trying to produce actual original content. Based on, just kind of a high-level overview of what we've seen since the core update in March, this has changed. Low-quality content is no longer surfacing as much. There's still edge cases where it's definitely succeeding, but it's far less effective to just produce a churn of AI content. That doesn't mean that AI is as a whole penalized, because that their line is still, we reward high quality content however it's produced. So it can start with AI. It's just that what you publish has to be useful and high quality and worthy of ranking, just like any other content has to be worthy of doing. So the same cues come into play. Authority and relevance are the biggest things that can help something rank on Google. Doesn't matter if it starts as AI. It can still work in search engines. And finally, we touched on this a bit. The question of, can I ask AI to actually do my SEO optimization for me? I'm not willing to say absolutely not, but I think it's just very rough as a starting point. It will use keywords if you're asked, if you ask it to, optimize for certain keywords, but not always in the places where they actually need to be. They don't always appear in section headers and things like that. They don't always adhere to SEO best practices in ways that can help you, seed the best chance that your content will succeed. Its SEO knowledge, as mentioned, comes from online sources, so it's kind of incomplete, and it doesn't really know what it's doing if you were to ask it to optimize a piece for keywords. So again, it will throw keywords in there, but what you get is usually something that doesn't really feel readable. It's kind of spamming the keyword or using it in odd places as opposed to just using it the way humans would want to read it. It also doesn't scan the sites that it references for quality. So it often pulls information, and this is even a disclaimer that they have below the entry field for ChatGPT, that when you scan a site with ChatGPT, it doesn't actually, it makes frequent mistakes and pulls false information. It doesn't always pull the right context. And so you really have to be careful about the sources that you're pulling from. One of the big components of SEO is linking to other authoritative sites to prove that your content is coming from good sources. And if you are instead drawing your information from poor sources and then linking to the pages that ChatGPT pulls from, you're going to have a bad time from an SEO perspective because it's going to demonstrate that you're, citing Wikipedia as your most common source, which ChatGPT frequently does. So you just got to be careful about the relevance and correctness of its information when you engage with it. And the final component is keyword research, and search data is not something that ChatGPT does. There are other tools that incorporate ChatGPT into that process, but they're often paid and kind of expensive. So people have already capitalized on this function to make it part of a search engine package, basically. But base ChatGPT does not have any access to keyword data, so it can't tell you what to target. It can't tell you which keywords would be a good idea to focus on. It can't help you create a keyword or an SEO strategy. All it can do is potentially scan your content for where it could put its keywords in, the keywords that you give it. But you have to come to it with a vision. You have to understand what you're trying to target before you can even make use of ChatGPT in that way. And even then, what it produces is going to be not the most optimized piece of content that you could probably produce if you were just writing it on your own. So when it comes to how you can engage with ChatGPT or other AI tools effectively, it all comes down to the prompt. The prompt that you're actually writing and giving to them is the most important thing for productive engagement with ChatGPT. And there are really three components to any good prompt. The first is to define the task or role that you want the AI to fill. So you just give it as much detail as you can about the assignment that you'd like it to complete. You then go into providing some instructions with some simple and very clearly stated directions that make it easy for the AI to understand exactly what you're looking for. Specificity here is key on all fronts. Imagine that you're giving this assignment again to a child or a high school student, roughly, and that you need to very clearly map out what it is you're trying to get them to do. The same goes for approach. It's really easy to be vague when it comes to stylistic coaching. If you want like a tone or a voice or something, or you want the article to be structured in a certain way, that's where we need to get specific, because if we leave it broad, we have an example here that shows you kind of what happens on the stylistic front. The thing to remember is that the prompts are not just one sentence only. I know I showed off a one sentence prompt earlier on, and I've been seeded a couple throughout the presentation. But you do not have to do one sentence. You don't have to do all this work in one sentence. It can be a whole paragraph that you describe what you need. And in fact, that's often a good way to do if you want something really that precisely suits what you're looking for. The other thing too is, since ChatGPT is conversational, if you don't like what it produces as a first draft, you can always go back to it and say, keep this, drop this, and kind of tweak the revisions from there. So it's kind of more of like a collaborative process with the AI. Again, kind of getting into that, how we can work together to make this work. So you don't have to feel like you have to get the prompt absolutely perfect the first try. You're just trying to start the conversation with as much detail as you can, and then you sort of tweak from there based on what it outputs. So we're going to break down each of those three parts and how you can do them effectively. The first is defining the task or role. And the most obvious way when you wanted to generate content is to start with the phrase write. Start your prompt off with just the write command. It understands that very well. It understands exactly what you're looking for. You're going to be producing some content, and it starts off in the right place. But if you want to actually provide a format, that's something that comes next. It's just write an article. It's kind of just a good place to start. And then a basic synthesis of what it is you want it to actually cover in the article. That's sort of where every prompt that I've seen work very well starts, is just write the format and then the topic, essentially, or what I want them to do in the article. Some examples here are comparing different types of riding lawnmowers, an article explaining the basics of swimming pool maintenance, or an article about the health benefits of regular exercise. Doesn't have to be an article either if you have another format that you have in mind. We're just focused on blog articles and generative copywriting for SEO at this particular time. But you can change that format up. That's where you would really swap in whatever you wanted to do, write a web page, write a static page, write a press release, anything like that. That would be kind of where you'd place your format and assignment. Another way to approach this that's a little bit less useful in copywriting and more useful on the code side, but can occasionally yield some interesting results, maybe not for an actual article or something that you wanted to publish, but for some research or some brainstorming, is to use the phrase act as your lead in. This is a way you can actually tell it what role to occupy within a given prompt or conversation. This is going to be interesting if you're writing for a very particular audience. So if you have something where your audience is going to be very expert in a given field, you can actually tell ChatGPT to act as an expert and edit a field as if it were, or edit a bit of text as if it were an expert in the field. And so it will go and it will look up what are the sort of advanced functions of this particular topic. And then it will scan your text and maybe provide revisions and bump it up in terms of its technical know-how and add some information in. Another thing is if you have an existing article, this can be really useful. You can have it act as an editor and actually have it act as an editor with experience. So again, it will pull from that knowledge of a given topic base. It will go look it up and understand what it needs to know to be an expert in that space. And we'll do this all in 10, 15 seconds and synthesize from that a bit of text or something else that it's going to generate based on what your prompt is or what you're asking it to refine. And you can even have it act as an interviewer. Again, this is limited use, but sometimes it produces some interesting ideas or something if you're brainstorming, where it will actually prompt both sides of a conversation, and it will actually script out an interview and actually provide some expert knowledge through that pathway. Again, it's limited and it's not something that you would ever want to publish, but it's kind of interesting to see what it does here and what kind of ideas it can generate. So the act as is more if you want it to be in an editorial role and not necessarily producing the writing, or if you want it to approach a piece of writing from a certain lens. It can do that to, some limits are placed on that, but it does a pretty good job in general of finding expertise where it can online and applying that. The next thing is just providing simple, clear directions about the structure of the piece you're trying to create. So this can be anything from length to the actual sections of the piece that you want to include within. So things that you want to actually break down a bit further, you can provide that. Anything that you want to make sure gets in there as a talking point can be provided. If you want the information to flow in a particular way, or if you want it to be structured in a way or laid out in order that you want to dictate, you can do that. Again, as concise and simple as possible, but the more instruction you provide, the more parameters it can hit. You can also tell it that you want you to format the article as a list or in sections of a certain kind. You can provide as much detail there as you want. And again, if you do want to try and seed in some keywords, this is where you could do it in addition to the sort of task or the definition that you did at the onset. But again, limited effectiveness there. It would just be for a starting point. So if we take these two parts together, this sort of defining the task and then modifying with directions, we can take an example from one of the prompts listed above, or in the previous slides, and we get, say, write an article comparing different types of riding lawnmowers, and we add to it, structure the article in a list format with sections breaking down the advantages and disadvantages of each category of riding lawnmower, minimum word count of 1,000. Now we're approaching something that's a bit more specific. You're more likely with that to get exactly what you're looking for. If I had just left in the first part, write an article comparing different types of riding lawnmowers, it's going to do whatever it does based on what it finds out about articles and blog formats and how it thinks that should be constructed. It's going to construct it based on what it finds online too, which can make it a bit more likely to plagiarize. So it may just flat out steal an article on riding lawnmowers from another source and just pull it wholesale. Or if not, pull it and modify it slightly at the most. they're more likely to do that as opposed to, when you provide more specificity, you're likely to get something that you can actually really use as something original. Plagiarism is a concern with ChatGPT, just as an aside. It does occasionally just pull things. And so you do want to make sure that you're not just, stealing something outright. But generally speaking, it does try and synthesize everything to create a new piece. You're more likely to get that the more specific you are to your particular use case. So that's another reason to just make sure that you're combining your prompt with clear directions that it can reference. Now, when it comes to tone and style guidance, this is something that people want from AI. They want to be able to say, make it conversational, do something informal or a particular style or something like that. Maybe write this in the style of an author that I know or in the voice of someone that I'd like to imitate. And frankly, robots are really just not made to capture this. This is something that I think no matter what we do, there will always be a cap as to what is style that only humans can really feel. Because this is kind of it's a subjective thing as to what these styles are. If you give it a prompt, for example, just out of curiosity, I was giving it the prompt, write the first stanza of a sonnet in the style of William Shakespeare about falling in love. And I guess stanza is improper. It's two couplets, but that's the English major in me. That kind of is coming in, bleeding in there. And what it produced was this. It produced a poem that I called What is Love by ChatGPT because it has no idea, as soon as I say falling in love, it has no idea, of course, what I'm talking about. It's going to look up whatever it can find online about the feeling of love and try and capture it. It's going to pull in some basic symbols. I'm not going to read this aloud, but feel free. I think it might actually wound me physically if I try and read this, but just generally there's some kind of touch points that you can see that are familiar, that look like Shakespeare. It's got the word doth in it. Right away, it kind of evokes immediately something that we can see if we scan it quickly as Shakespeare. We also notice that it's 10 syllables per line. It's pulling in the mechanical elements, right? It's got the basics in place and what makes this a style. It kind of sounds fancy. It sounds like language that we might kind of associate with something more archaic. It's sometimes in iambic pentameter even, which is kind of surprising, given that I'm not even sure how it would register sort of the sound of phrases. But it is kind of close to it sometimes and veers off at others. It mostly just wrote a poem that rhymes in alternating rhyme scheme with 10 syllables per line. But does it have the basic mechanics? Yeah, kind of. It has the core parts in place. But most importantly, it's also quite bad. And that's not really something that we associate with William Shakespeare, for sure. It's just tried to embody the basics of the style, the mechanics of the style, the skeleton that the style is based on. It's not really understanding what makes that Shakespeare. And this is kind of true for all style that you try and inform writing with through ChatGPT. It's going to get the core mechanics, and it is fairly impressive how well it analyzes and figures out what those core mechanics are. And sometimes that can be interesting from a research perspective, if you want to break that down. But it's not going to know how to actually apply those mechanics in a way that feels human. And this is where, if you want style, if you want brand, if you want any sort of voice in your content, it's not worth trying to incorporate that into your prompt. It's just going to cause you frustration, and what you're going to get. I have some hilarious examples of like what happens if you tell it to be conversational. It will actually start the piece with, "Hey there." So it doesn't really understand what you mean by these sort of terms that we use commonly that we understand. So just something to keep in mind, that you want to avoid style. If you do want to try and provide some guidance in terms of how it should write, the key is specificity. No vague, like in the style of conversational or informal voice. You want to give it specific guidelines that it can use. It understands, for example, reading levels, and it understands expertise. So if you say, I want a voice appropriate for experts in the subject, it's going to know that you mean technical. It's going to know that it doesn't have to simplify. It can make this advanced concepts, which it also understands, the kind of levels of complexity of a concept. And then it will apply that to what it brings into the piece. If you say write the reading level of a high school student, it has full access to readability indexes. So things like the Flesch-Kincaid index and other sort of readability terms. It can totally apply those to text. You can even provide it with existing text and say, can you refine this up or down on the readability scale? And it will help you do that. So that's kind of a useful tool in and of itself. Or if you want something more conversational, instead of saying the term conversational, say speak directly to the reader using you. It will understand how to apply that sort of second person speech in the content that it produces, but it has to be that specific, because otherwise it's going to go look up whatever it means to be conversational, and it's going to come back with who knows what. So the key is, if you want to get into style, to provide specificity wherever you possibly can. Let's say we wanted to pull one of these. Let's say we take the writing to the reading level of a high school student and pull that into our prompt. So now we have write an article comparing different types of riding lawnmowers, structure the article in a list format with sections breaking down the advantages and disadvantages of each category of riding lawnmower, write to the reading level of a high school student, minimum word count of 1,000. Now we've got something that looks more like an actual like a paper assignment or something that someone would have a very specific map as far as how they should proceed. And that specificity leads to a result. Now there's some kind of stiff formatting things here, but I put in this prompt exactly. It led in with a little bit of intro text. I'd probably want to expand that a little bit more. I'd also probably want to add some content for underneath that lawn tractors heading to provide a little bit more background into the exact type of lawnmower that I was using. And I can certainly go back and prompt ChatGPT to do this. But for a starting point, this is actually quite good. There's some information here. It's formatted the way that I asked for. It provides advantages and disadvantages. I cut off the article after this one section, but there's, just as I asked for, it's got sections for each category of lawnmower, and then it's got advantages and disadvantages throughout. So it actually worked quite well and produced something that I can start with, that I can start refining from an SEO perspective and also kind of reshaping the copy accordingly. Now, the important thing here isn't necessarily how high quality the writing is. The important thing is that it did this in 10 seconds. Now, even if I'm a skilled writer, even if you're somebody who's practiced and can whip something up really fast, you're never going to approach 10 seconds as a draft for anything. Like, that's just not humanly possible. So to get a first draft in that amount of time can save you a significant amount of time investment. You know, even somebody just throwing this together 1,000 words, it could take at least 2 hours for an experienced writer, even to chuck that together, to do some research and throw that together. And that would be fast. So if you can cut that down to 10 seconds, that's something. You know, if you're an unpracticed writer, that could be up to 4 hours that you're saving. So it's pretty substantial, the amount of time savings that you can have. And it maybe takes at most an hour to go through and then refine the thing from there. Now, this is one where we got a good result. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes the first result is not so great, and we end up realizing that ChatGPT isn't going to be able to work for a given topic. And that's about experimentation. You learn what it can do well and what it can't over time. But something like this, that's a very simple, very easily researchable topic, and you provided enough specificity that it had a lot to work with, can be a really perfect fit for content for ChatGPT. And of course, you can always go back to it later and tweak the prompt and what you get based on what it came out with. I could always ask it to go back again and try another draft. But at least as a starting point, that's pretty good for 10 seconds. The biggest thing that I would say as a final point is just that the way to keep this content human and working is that it needs to have a human touch. There needs to be something on the other end revising it. The biggest problem that people run into with ChatGPT is inaccuracies. They are very common. You can, on ChatGPT, for example, ask for sources for its information. But since its sources are so wide-flung and diverse, it won't always give you a full grasp of everything that it cited in order to generate the article. But it will give you a few links to some of the most prominent pages that it pulled from. You can always double check that those are authoritative. Make sure that it's pulling from good sources. That's a quick way to do it. It's a quick fact check. But like that edit, there has to be at least a pass of just make sure that this is something accurate. And, you know, that it reflects an accurate understanding of the topic at hand. Big thing is don't leave voice tone and personality to a robot. You're going to need to go back through and seed in those specific voice elements. If you do have very specific style points, you can include that in your prompt. But for the most part, you're probably going to have to do that work yourself. Again, we're still talking about significant time savings. Even if you do all of these editing elements, this is still going to streamline your work pretty substantially. The other thing is to avoid mass producing articles. There's some tools out there that I've interacted with that will actually, if you just type in a set of keywords and say, churn out 100 articles and publish them directly to my WordPress site, you can do that. There's plugins that will allow you to create articles and it will just auto-publish all of them. Those are exactly the articles that are being punished right now by Google's algorithm. So what you want to do instead is make sure that you're still putting a focus on quality over quantity, that you're producing good substantive content, and that it's keyword researched and appropriate for your business, and not just whatever it's going to spin up as a result of, its own designs. So you want to really have a hand in what you're allowing it to create and what you're publishing on your site. The second thing is keyword optimization and research. You're going to have to do that on your own. You're going to have to create a keyword strategy and a map kind of what you want to focus on and a vision for SEO. But otherwise, you're free to use it for content creation. It can generate the content. It's good for SEO in that front. You just have to know what you want it to produce and what keywords you want to focus on before you even come to the table. And also then refine the content that it produces accordingly so that it matches keyword optimization and SEO best practices. The other thing to look for is just basic common writing issues. Passive voice is common because passive voice is common in all writing. People love to write in passive voice. And so it's learning from us how to write, basically. So it has the same issues with writing that sometimes we do. We use overly formal language or language that's not appropriate to our audience on occasion. And poor transitions and flow of information is very common. Doesn't understand how segues work all the time and creating kind of a smooth flow of information. So that can be really something to keep an eye on as you work on your content. And for now, at least, photos, videos, and graphics have to be done independently. It's not something that AI can really cover at the moment, in my opinion, unless it's something that really doesn't have to register deeply with the audience. It's just something that you need as a visual element, then it can work. But if you want to add something more interactive to your content, you really have to still, employ video producers and photo producers. You need designers to create infographics. And there will always be a place for those people in interacting, even as those tools grow more advanced. There will always be a sort of editing and revising function at play. So I think just in general, the human touch is very important, but these tools can be incredibly empowering. And so hopefully you're walking away today with a little bit more of an idea of how to complement those tools and how to use them to support your work, as opposed to treating them as either a distant or scary thing, or something that just you're not really sure how to get the most value out of. And that's all I have for you today. So with that, we will move into the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was awesome. A lot of good information, as usual. I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to get to right away here. The first one came in asking if we end up using AI-generated content on our website with global users in parentheses, do we have to have an AI policy on our site informing our readers?
To this point, you do not. It would be an interesting move from a transparency perspective, if that's really important to your brand, to make sure that people understand that this is an AI generated bit of content, then you could certainly do that, but there's no requirement that you advertise that you've generated your content with AI.
Yeah, and I haven't seen anything either. So thank you for that. Here's another question, and I think these are kind of opinions, but that's okay because it's an educated opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on whether or not the paid version of, let's say, like ChatGPT is worth it?
I would say my opinion is yes, because this is all done in ChatGPT 3.5, which is a less sophisticated version of the ChatGPT API. The 4.0 version that's accessed if you pay for it is quite a bit more sophisticated, and just generally I've found more effective on a first shot. So its first drafts tend to be a little bit higher quality. The more important thing, though, is that data analysis tool is the paid portion as well. You get access to that when you can subscribe to that. I don't remember if it's part of the same subscription that gives you 4.0 or if it's a separate one. but their data analysis tool is great. And I've already definitely found use for that. And it's pretty impressive in its ability to help you sort through big swaths of data. So I would say if you're going to be using it for research, yes. If you're going to be using it for content, you could probably use the free tool and do okay.
Great. Thank you. That's good insight. Another question just came in. How can someone publish online or in print or use in any fashion AI generated content? Are there any copyright concerns?
That's a very good question because there is actually a case that's coming, I think it's in California, where there are artists and writers who are actually bringing a suit to court about their content being used to inform ChatGPT's algorithm. So that means that ChatGPT is actively pulling from and referencing their content in order to shape the content that it produces. So I think that's a question that we still kind of have before us is, are there issues with the fact that it's borrowing all of this work to try and synthesize new work? Is that a problem? My argument would be that it's what we do as a human brain. We synthesize all the things that we learn from all the time and use it to create new things, and that comes from influences, and that's okay. But some artists feel differently about it. I would say for now, there is no legal requirement. Nobody's been gotten in trouble for using articles that are like, if they're derived from something or inspired by something, that's fine. If it were plagiarized entirely, like if it just got lifted straight up, then I think you could probably make a case potentially, but there's been no case like that to this point. And obviously I'm not a copyright lawyer, so I wouldn't take my word as gospel here. But to this point, there hasn't been anything that's been an issue there. It's an ongoing discussion for sure. So it's something to keep an eye on if you use AI content.
Fair. Thank you for that, Alex. We have time for one more question, and this is an interesting one once again. I'd like to know your overall opinion if AI can replace human headcount if the organization's goal is to build a thriving, impactful blog site that needs updates and maintenance at least one time a week and with little to no current resources internally to achieve this outcome.
I would say if you're resource strapped at the moment, it may save you from going out and hiring a copywriter, but even then, you're going to need some resources to revise the work. So it may not be a full-time position, but it's not going to replace human touch at some point in the process at all. It is a good place to start as copywriting goes, but you need an editor. You need somebody who's going to devote the resources to actually shaping the content into something that will be effective. You can get something up with just ChatGPT, but if you want it to actually work, if you want it to rank in search engines, if you want it to be something that users want to interact with, then, and especially if you want to create a lively blog that's updated regularly that people want to tune back into, you're going to need a human in charge of the process and kind of shepherding that content. So in that particular case, I would say no. I would say you need a human involved at some point in the process. What it can do is speed up that process, leave people more available in terms of volume, and it can make it so that you can just generally streamline content production. You may not need a practiced copywriter, just someone who can devote some resources to managing this process and who knows digital marketing best practices well enough to refine the content into something that will fit in your site and that will be effective in turn. So I think no, there's still a human component to it always.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. That's all the time we have for questions this morning. Thank you to all who submitted them. And before we wrap things up, I want to briefly mention that we'd be delighted to help you continue your digital journey by offering a complimentary digital marketing audit and or consultation. And this may help you with some deeper questions you have around AI. We got some good questions today and provide you with time with our consulting team to get those questions answered. Learn more at nwsdigital.com/DM consult. We do have several upcoming webinars we think you'll enjoy. On May 9th, we will present web accessibility, no more excuses. It's really getting to that time, especially with some laws now coming down internationally, where accessibility is going to be mandatory. So it's something to pay attention to. June 13th, we will pose the question, Is data visualization marketers' new job security? And finally, on July 11th, we discuss cracking the code of GA4 e-commerce tracking. As always, all of our webinars are complimentary, and all webinars begin at 10 a.m. Central. You can register at learn@northwoods.com. And finally, if you're looking for information on a specific topic or just want to stay up to date on the latest trends and developments in the constantly changing world of digital, we have several on-demand thought leadership resources for you. You can check out our blog, our webinar recordings, and our YouTube channel and playlist for more expert insights and ideas. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out a link to this recording here in the next day or two, and you can pick up those links in the PowerPoint that we're sending out. So that concludes our webinar this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. And from all of us here at Northwoods, have a great day and a great rest of your week. Thank you.